Hi, welcome to Lightspeed Academy. I'm Jim Cooper, and thanks for joining me for this Lightspeed session on styling React components. Right now, our website doesn't look like much. Eventually, we want our Outpost page to look like this. So to get started, let's add some global styles to our site. We can do that right here in our index.css file. It already has some default styling, but we're going to delete that, and in its place we'll add these styles. These are just a bunch of global styles that we want available to every page on our site. Things like fonts, background color, etc. And if we take a look at our site now, you can see that we've already got some changes here. That's largely coming from the fact that we've styled our body tag with colors and padding. But there's one piece of our styles that isn't working. Notice that we have the font family set to use our nasalization font, but we haven't defined that font. So right here at the top, I'm going to add a couple of font tags. And these are referencing some font files that I need to add to my site. I'm going to go ahead and create a font folder right here. And then off screen, I'm going to add the font files to this folder. Okay, so there's those font files. Now notice that right here, I'm referencing these font files with a URL that is relative to this CSS file. I can do that because this index.css file is being processed by Webpack at build time. So it will go out and relatively load those font files. The same thing works for images in our CSS. You can access any static resources from your CSS file, as long as they're inside your source folder. Okay, so it might not be obvious, but our fonts have changed now. Next, let's see how to use CSS classes in React. First of all, I want to style these two headers so that they have a different background, like you can see here on our final site. We already have a global style for that right here named section header. So I want to use that class to style my headers right here in my Outpost component. In normal HTML, you would do that like this, using the class attribute. However, because we're using JSX and class is a keyword in JavaScript, we actually have to use the React class name attribute like this whenever we want to add a CSS class. And we'll add this to our cart header too. Cool, now our headers are nicely styled. Now we just need to use Flexbox to get them displaying side by side like they are here. To do that, let's change this fragment to a div, and I'll add a class name on this div of container. And then down here on these two divs, I'll add class names of main left and right sidebar. Okay, now I could go add these classes to our global index.css styles, but these aren't really global classes. These are specific to our Outpost component. So instead, I'm going to add a new CSS file right here next to our Outpost component named outpost.css. And inside here, I'm going to paste in these styles. Okay, so we've added styles in our outpost.css file, and we've added those class names here. But if we look at our site, those styles aren't actually being applied yet. That's because we haven't actually loaded this outpost.css file anywhere. So the last thing we need to do is import that in our component like this. And that's all we need to do is import it. This will cause Webpack to load those CSS styles for us. Just be aware that even though we have these styles in their own file, they'll still be loaded globally so they can inadvertently affect other components. We'll talk more about that in our video on using CSS modules. But if we take a look at our site now, awesome. This is styled and laid out just like we want now. Okay, so that's how we use classes. I just want to mention one other way to style components, and that's with CSS in JavaScript. So for example, I could create a main left object up here like this. Notice that this is just a JavaScript object. And because of that, our CSS property names are camel cased instead of hyphenated. But now I can use that down here. So instead of using this class name, I'm going to use style, and I'll set that equal to our main left object. And if we take a look at our site, that works great too. So this works, but just be aware that this creates inline styles which don't perform quite as well as CSS classes. For that reason, I'd recommend that you typically use classes instead of CSS in JavaScript. And that's the basics of styling React components. If you want to keep going, here's the next video on using CSS modules with React. And here's the entire Lightspeed React playlist. And of course, please like and subscribe if you'd like to see the other content we're putting together. Thanks, and keep learning at Lightspeed.